I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're exploring the harrowing and heart-wrenching journey of 8 gay men battling AIDS in a powerful book. It is called Eight Fought to Live, the story of my AIDS therapy group, 1988 to 1990. It is written by Florence Rosiello, and she worked in the midst of the escalating AIDS epidemic in New York City. Dr. Rosiello led a therapy group at the Gay Men's Health Crisis where each member faced their mortality with bravery and brotherhood. This profound narrative not only shares their stories, but also reflects on the emotional authenticity that defines the true therapeutic connection. We're delighted to have this very talented doctor and author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put her in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her remarkable book. The links are below this interview. Doctor, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Switching the hands of time back to the years in the 1980s, it was a time of confusion. It was a time of fear. It was a time of misinformation when it came to AIDS. It was a very, very difficult time. Um, This book is about your experience running a therapy group, right? In the middle of the crisis.
Yeah, 1988 to 1990. And during that time, they didn't die the first year. They died the second year.
Yeah.
And they
All
all
eight
passed.
men died?
Yeah, all 8 men died.
Amazing. Amazing. Te-
Um,
Tell us, we talked a little bit before the interview. Gay Men's Health Crisis was a revolutionary group. Tell us a little bit about that organization.
I don't know what people would have done back then without that group. I mean, and it wasn't just that group. I mean, other groups were coming out of it too, like ACT UP, a lot of activism.
Yeah.
People there, I guess you could say that they were activists too.
Yeah.
Uh, Certainly Larry Kramer. So it was a very confusing time. As you said, I was brand new on the psychoanalytic field
Yeah.
and very confused and really had no idea what I was in for. Absolutely no idea. But I think I would like to go down there, do something because actually I had lost, oh boy, 10 people already.
Wow.
Yeah. One of them was one of the first. He died in 1980 and they called it parasites back then.
Yeah. Gay cancer was another name for it. Um, and people were afraid. I remember we'd go to interviews to interview people with AIDS, and we weren't sure of the route of transmission yet. And people were very, very scared. Maybe rightfully so, maybe out of ignorance. Were you a little bit afraid being in such close proximity?
I wasn't, which
Hmm.
is interesting, but I
Yeah.
was. But I remember this one of the stories that one of the group members, Vito Russo, told was he had his own TV show,
Hmm.
and he said that the people who did makeup were afraid to touch it.
Yeah.
They thought he would get AIDS, that they would get AIDS from him.
Yeah. I worked with technicians who would make sure they had everything in their hands when they went into an interview so they wouldn't have to shake hands. So yeah, they'd carry a tripod in one hand, a lighting kit in another, and then when they like, "Hi, how are you?" So they couldn't shake hands. It was a time of ignorance. It was a terrible, terrible time. But in that darkness, you were a light to these 8 men, no doubt. I mean, you were with them during the most trying times of their lives. Tell us what that was like when these men are talking to you about this disease that's consuming their bodies and is a death sentence at that point.
In the very first session, I walked in and everyone was already there, all 8 of them. And I had originally interviewed 11 people. But between the interview one week and starting the session the next, 3 men died. So I walk into the room and there are 3 empty chairs. And I said, well, okay, I know what's going on. And I said, well, let's start the session. And someone says, well, let's wait for the others. And I said, well, they won't be coming. And one of the group members very powerfully said, okay, no one in this group dies. And they all kind of moved around as though that meant they agreed. And for the first year, not one of them died. And that was almost unheard of. It didn't start until the second year. And actually, the fellow who said no one dies in the group, he waited until the group was over. When everybody had died, he was one of the two people left. And he died a week later. So he kept his promise. He didn't die during the group.
Amazing. Amazing. Do you believe it was their will to live that kept them alive?
Oh, they would go into the hospital. They said to me, you're not allowed to go in the hospital, you'll burn out. And I thought, okay, you must know.
Hmm.
They would go into the hospital, and there's one story where they were visiting one of the group members, and they were about to leave, and one of them then turned around, went back to the bed where the ill patient was, and looked into his face and screamed, "I'm not done with you."
Hmm.
Well, he came to the next meeting a week later. He got out of the hospital.
Amazing.
Yes, they supported each other. I can't imagine them doing it without each other, because basically they had no one. All their friends were dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And this is trial by fire for you. You're a young therapist, basically right out of school, being put into the most challenging role you could ever imagine.
it's a good thing I didn't know what I was doing back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, yes, if I had known what I was getting into, I might not have, but maybe I probably would have, because I like things that are emotional, which is, of course, why I'm an analyst.
What
So,
what was it like in those sessions? What did the men want to talk about? Tell us what a typical, if there is such a thing, session was like.
yeah, one of the group members said, "I want to show you something." And he took out his little black book. They were address books. You probably remember them. We
Hmm.
all had. And he opened it so that the group could see. And every single solitary name was scratched out. Every single solitary name. So one of the group members said, why are you carrying that around?"
Mm.
He said, "Well, they're my friends.
Yeah.
They're not here, but they're my friends, and I'm keeping them." It was quite emotional.
Yeah,
There,
exactly.
some of them sometimes talked about how their families rejected them. One was actually accused of going out and getting AIDS for spite. His father accused him. I know.
Yeah.
Um, and they had already come out. Remember, back then, it was gay people were actually really starting to feel comfortable in society.
Mm.
And then this happened.
Right, right. I mean, it was still largely a homophobic society, I feel. Um, there was a comfort level with certain people coming out and being open. And then, like you said, this was like the bolo punch that nobody expected. Now suddenly they're feared because of health reasons, you know. And it was a terrible, terrible time. What do you hope readers get out of this book?
Well, I hope that they realize that when you're inexperienced, you can do things that you might not have done down the road. So
Hmm.
it's a good idea to just jump in
Yeah.
feet first and just take what comes. Because I think what happens is you start to feel a lot stronger. I
Mm.
certainly did. Well, I mean, the group changed my life, really.
Yeah.
Um, they wanted a lot from me, and they didn't want me to be a stuffy analyst. And so I was not, and I haven't been since.
Good, good. And I guess the book also teaches about the power of the will to live, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that they lived for each other. Sometimes I didn't really feel as though I should be in the room,
Mm.
because they didn't really need me as much as they needed each other. But at least, I don't know if this is true, but I think that they didn't take people who had AIDS to be group leaders.
Mm.
I'm positive on that. And so I was able to take that, because one of the fellows in the group was a social worker who worked with an AIDS group in a hospital that worked with AIDS,
Mm.
and they didn't let him run the group.
Interesting, interesting. Um, What was it like writing the book, going over this dark chapter in history? And I say dark chapter, and it was largely, but like I said, you guys had a little ray of sunlight there, a little hope
Mhm. What was it like?
writing the book.
It was one of the hardest things I've ever done besides run that group.
Hmm.
I would write something, close the computer and cry. And then I would pretend for a month or so that I wasn't writing a book. And then I would do it again because someone would say, well, how's the book going? It's, okay, fine. I'd open it up, write another chapter, close it, and cry again. So it was very, very difficult writing it. And it wasn't that I wrote it 30 years later. I've been writing it for 30 years.
Yeah.
And actually, it was my friends and my family that said, you've got to finish this book. And I just kept reading chapters to everyone. And they said, that's great. That's great. Write another one. And without that encouragement, it would have been a lot harder for me.
Yeah. Well, I think it is important work. I think it's important that we don't forget from whence we came. I think people need to be reminded of the struggles of people in the gay community, people with illness, people, I'm sure AIDS till this day is stigmatized to one level or another, although it seems like it's largely under control, thank goodness. And that really seemed to only come about when Magic Johnson contracted it, because he became almost like the heterosexual face of AIDS,
Yeah. Mhm.
and fortunately, we poured a lot of money into research, and that research benefited people. And a very
Actually,
familiar face to all of us, Dr. Fauci was instrumental in it as well, right?
oh, very much. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, they did talk about AZT and during the group times, and AZT apparently killed them as well. Because AZT, well, it blocked certain cells, cancer cells, from progressing. It blocked all cells. Now, what's really upsetting is that it was very soon after 1990 that they found something that could help them.
yeah,
If these men had been able to just hold on, but they
yeah,
were so sick. One had elephantitis. Well, you could see the Kaposi sarcoma. I mean, yeah, they would spend a lot of time trying to hide them, putting makeup on it, getting them injected.
yeah. It was a tough time. It was a tough time. You have documented it in your book. You have memorialized these men in this book. You have honored these men in this book. It's a harrowing and heart-wrenching story of 8 gay men battling AIDS in the 1980s. It is called 8 Fought to Live, the story of my AIDS therapy group, 1988 through 1990. It's written by Dr. Florence Rosiello. She was just a young kid out of school back then, one of her first assignments as a therapist, and it was trial by fire, but obviously she survived it and rose to the occasion. And now she is sharing this story with you. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been lovely. Thank you.
I appreciate your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.